Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome all the attendees to PARA webinar. The topic of today's webinar is Developing Partnerships Between Academy and Industry. Please join me to welcome our honor guest speaker, Dr. Perry Hobson. Dr. Perry Hobson is the Pro Vice Chancellor for Global Engagement at Taylor's University, Malaysia, and a professor in hospitality and tourism. Before I leave the floor to Perry, for any question you may have, please send in by typing in the question box, as all the attendees will be in a listening mode only. All the questions will be answered at the end of the session. So it is about time, Perry. I'll leave the floor to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Monica, for that introduction, and good afternoon, or whatever time zone it might be, wherever you are. Hopefully the screen will come up in front in a minute for you, and I look forward to having an interesting discussion with whoever we've got online and a webinar around the world today. As Monica said, my name is Perry Hobson, and I'm based now here at Taylor's University in Malaysia. And my background has been involved in tourism and hospitality education for a long time. And I've been very fortunate to have worked in a number of different places and been educated at a number of different universities in the UK, in the US, and Australia, and worked with a number of different institutions and have been involved with a wide number of professional bodies, obviously including PARTA. I'd like to thank Peter Simone for the opportunities of, through our Education and Training Committee for having these webinars, and having listened to his first one the other day, to pick up on some of the thoughts that he put forward about human capital development. And through my work over the last few years with the ICE, the International Centre of Excellence in Tourism and Hospitality Education, I have had the opportunity to visit a wide range of institutions. And what I thought in today's webinar was to focus on some of the things that are being done and to pick up on some of the challenges that we're facing and how we can move ahead in terms of developing those partnerships between industry and education. Today's webinar includes people from both industry and education, and I think that's a great step forward. And obviously one of my interests have been involved with PARTA has been because of that. And I think as we look at this connectivity between education, research, embedded in the idea of professional practice that we're all involved with. And hopefully through today's webinar we'll kind of explore some of that and also focus on what I believe will be the common element there, which is in the middle of the diagram, which I hope you're seeing by now, which is this focus on innovation. Now, as I mentioned, PARTA I've been involved with for quite a while, and one of the things we've been actively working on through the Education and Training Committee has been the PARTA Youth Forums. And one of the features of those forums, again, has been connecting students with practitioners, whether it was here in KL last year at Taylor's University, Lyceum University of the Philippines second part of last year, and shortly at Thammasat University in Bangkok. The idea has been to be able to connect young people with people who've got experience and working on those connections. And particularly at our last forum in Manila, where we had some 360 students with over a dozen speakers from the industry sharing their experiences and insights. And obviously PARTA is not only involved with these kind of forums, but also through the foundation, helping students to get more actively involved. And for example, Capilano University has been working with the hill tribes up in the villages of northern Vietnam in places such as Sapa. And I think it's getting that connectivity and finding those opportunities for academics into research and with our students to get involved. Obviously, there's been other things that PART has been doing with the executive development, which is now going into something like its 32nd year at the University of Hawaii. The short courses as well that have been offered around, and so we're finding lots of opportunities for academics and industry and students to come together. But obviously I think a lot more can be done, and my concern is that the gap is what we're seeing. And it's that gap that I think we need to look at and see how we can try and build better bridges, bring in more connectivity, and particularly when it comes to education. And as Peter Simone was pointing out in his webinar recently, there is a difference between training and education. And I think we need to focus on that and to look at how we can develop opportunities, and much better opportunities than we've had in the past. And of course, as I've mentioned, I want to thank PARTA for the opportunities for doing that, but also think PARTA as an organisation can play a much stronger role in actually helping to bridge the divide that I'm afraid to say is very clearly still out there. So what sort of linkages do we see? Well, as I was pondering on this, and having been around a number of institutions, there are quite typical connectivity strategies that are being followed, and these include things such as industry advisory boards, industry-based internships, guest lectures, industry visits by educators and students. And as I was thinking about those and the other ones, such as career fairs and training restaurants, it seemed to me that we've been very good at doing a range of different activities. But what's the next step? How are we going to take that beyond? Because we've been doing a lot of these things for a lot of years. And as we look around what's happened in developed countries, but also to look at what's happening in the challenging parts of developing countries in Asia Pacific. So I think what we need to do is to say, how do we take this to the next level? What's the next step we need to take? What's the next evolution? So rather than just have the industry advisory boards, for example, how can we get those boards actively more involved rather than abstract advice which tends to be given? How can we find ways of engaging students not just in the internships but to partner with industry? How can we just go from just occasional guest lectures where people come in to share their thoughts to actually embedding individuals from the industry part of the curriculum on a more formalized basis? How can we take industry visits from just look-sees into being, whether it's competitions, joint projects, or events we're actually doing with the industry? Can we move from career fairs, which are often very static events held once a year, can we turn that more into a joint event and a symposium with industry? Is there a way that our training restaurants are not just there for training, but are actually turning into being experimental restaurants, working with industry to try out new ideas that often can't be done in a commercial operation? And then looking ahead, how can we look at some of those additional linkages, the things that we could include? We've already got a number of institutions in Asia have got training hotels. Again, how can we make those research and innovation hubs? Can we get involved in corporate social responsibility projects? Can we involve our students and industry in terms of what we're doing? And can we look together at these issues of joint research? So I see there's a number of other activities as well, whether it's faculty externships, the recognition awards, travel scholarships, etc. So what I wanted to do today in this webinar was to explore some of those in perhaps a little bit more detail before shifting to the more challenging area, particularly of the research. If we just look at industry advisory boards, I've had a great deal of experience with those, and more recently through a project we did with the ICE, we actually did some benchmarking to see how industry advisory boards were set up, how many people are on them, and they varied enormously from being people of about 5 to people having about 35. Some institutions struggle to get people to come along. Other institutions actually ask the industry to pay to belong. So there was quite a variety of what was happening. Here at Taylor's University, interestingly, we don't just have one, we actually have 3. We have one for our School of Hospitality, we have one for our School of Tourism and Events, and then we actually have another one which is for our School of Culinary Arts. So we've actively sought to have a lot of input. And what we've been looking to do with that input is to take it to another level in terms of it's all very well to have the industry come in and give advice, and we take that advice very seriously. Now I know a lot of institutions are not even able to get to that point. The challenge is to help those individuals understand the challenges educators face, as well as for educators to have a better understanding of the challenges that industry faces. And the question then is, how can we go to some sort of other level? And what I found wonderful with the advisory boards I've worked on is that the dedicated people actually often want to do much more than just give advice. So when I was faced with that at Southern Cross University, our industry advisory board said, what can we do? What more can we do to help? And it was fantastic to be able to say to them, well, we have a lot of students who would like to do student mobility. Airfares at that time were very expensive, and so our industry advisory board actively went out and approached Austrian Airlines in this particular case to get a discounted airfares for our students to increase the amount of students who could go on exchange. So we often found that moving just beyond the simple advice, but actively getting them involved to have a relationship with staff and students was a really important way of taking the concept of the advisory board to another level. Then of course there are new courses to be developed, and obviously education has to evolve, and as it evolves, how can we help that? How do we make that process happen? And here it's, again, whether it's institutions that have been founded with partnerships for the industry. So the Institut Paul Bocuse in France, for example, founded with money originally from one of the founders of Accor, partnered again with the industry to build that particular school. And again, at my own institution here at Taylor's University, to develop a new degree in culinology that was specifically done with the Research Chefs Association in the United States, to bridge that gap between culinary arts and the sciences side. So working with, in that particular case, a School of Biosciences, culinary arts, but to involve professional associations who've been part of that, so that they're not only just, again, giving advice, but can become part of that process of developing education and feeling that they're not just bystanders, but actively part of what is going on. Now, of course, internships are a very important part of tourism and hospitality degrees. Again, it was quite interesting not long ago doing some benchmarking, and we asked a few years ago a number of Australian institutions to get together, and we discovered that internships across a range of providers went from as low as about 80 hours up to about 1,550 hours. So it was an enormous spread. The average, I should point out, was about 600 or 700 hours. But nevertheless, the industry, when it looks at that, we have to look at these experiences and say, well, what are we trying to do with them, and how well are we doing this? Unfortunately, there's been all too many cases of students being either poorly prepared, the industry viewing internships often as, dare I say, cheap labour, and we have to ask ourselves the question, how come so many of our students are not going into the industry? We often see about 60% of students will go into the industry initially, which means another 40% will not. Where do they go? And why are they not going into the industry? And what is the drop-off? And I think we have to approach, again, this gap and see if maybe internship is part of the problem, and also can it be part of the solution. In fact, my own personal remembrance was that, in fact, the internship experiences put, I know, many of my colleagues, and fellow students when I was a student off the industry. So what can be done about that? How can we work on this together? And in some countries, institutions have been able to partner together just to make life easier. Several years ago, I met with about a dozen or so hotels, and their big complaint was that all the paperwork from every institution was somehow different. Every institution had a bit of a different quirk, yet still the basic responsibilities remained. So, for example, in the UK, the British institutions have got together, they formed an organisation called PATH, and they've essentially set up common standards of paperwork, so that the industry, in this case, had said, look, we love having the students, we're happy to work with you, but gee, this is getting confusing. So there are, I think, ways that we can look at doing these things better, having some broader engagements with the industry about what the role, how the industry can support internships better, and how institutions can. And this reaches beyond the individual institution. To go to the next level, in the case of internships, where can we go with that? Again, reflecting on something that's been done. Before I arrived at Taylor's University, there was already underway what is called here the Student Employment Program. And this came about because the industry was saying, we love your students, but our planning means that we just can't wait till a couple of months before graduation before knowing we've got someone or not. We want a longer time frame. We'd like to bring the students in at a higher level. So again, exploring that opportunity, the industry has agreed to basically create a class, and the companies we're talking about here include Shangri-La, Mandarin Oriental, Kuala Lumpur Convention Centre. So what they do is that they get students to commit at the start of year 2. They'll have 2 internships with the company. The students get a mentor. Over those 2 years, they get additional specialised workshops and seminars. Now, of course, there's no obligation by either the company or the student, but at least what has happened is that it's brought, again, a closer integration of students and industry, and again, to help try and bridge that gap where we're spending a lot of our resources and time in educating students for the industry, and yet they're not going into it. So there are, I think, ways that different institutions can look at crossing that gap, and other ways of industry and, again, education institutions working in partnership towards something that is going to be beneficial to both. So moving from the internships to working together with individuals, and again, I was looking through some pictures and slides as I was putting this webinar together and found one from a few years ago, which reminded me of, in this case, being recognised with the general manager of the Intercontinental Hotel and my academic colleague, Peter Lewis, who was at the hotel school in Sydney, for some of the work we've been doing there through Tourism Training Australia. And again, it was finding ways to work together between industry and academics, finding ways to bridge those gaps that inevitably exist there. Now, of course, I've found over the years many people who are interested to come and get involved with young people and students, and often we've had guest lecture programs, and as much as they've worked really well and they certainly have their place, what I tended to find was that we'd often find people who come in from the industry, do an hour, go away. And students, I think, got an unrealistic sort of snapshot. They may have got a lot of war stories, etc. And how we can engage with people in other ways. And I think some institutions have tried to find individuals from the industry to make them on a more regular basis, to make them adjuncts, so that it's not just you come in. They've made them honorary professors or professors for a day. There's a range of different titles and opportunities. Some institutions have gone to look for headline people. For example, Hong Kong Polytechnic University got Jackie Chan involved, who gave a lot of publicity as well to what he was doing as a tourism ambassador for Hong Kong. Others, such as John King, who's well known with PATA, as chair of our industry advisory board at Southern Cross University, we were able to get him involved to come in, to give lectures, and to not just be seen as someone who would give advice at a couple of times a year at industry advisory board functions, but to go beyond that. And I think there's a number of different ways that this can be done. The Novotel Pacific Bay is a hotel that's based in the town of Coffs Harbour, and interestingly part of Southern Cross University was actually located in what had been part of the grounds of this coastal resort. And what had happened here was that, unbeknownst to me, was that the National Marine Science Centre, which was part of the university, was there. And literally as you walk out of the door of that facility, you walk onto the golf course. The general manager and I, having hosted again our annual conference, CALTI conference there, got talking about how we could get his staff more involved in the education. And so what we did was we hosted classes there every week, and the managers came in every week. And the idea was to show students that a hotel is a living, running, and each week there was a discussion about what the latest week had brought, rather than a one-shot sort of snapshot in terms of the idea that a guest lecture will come in. So moving ahead, there were other opportunities there to go beyond those, to move to taking the industry visits. So those, again, can be a very important part of how industry will host students and groups of students. But I guess my question is how can we make that something more? And often that involves, again, a bit more level of engagement. So whether it's culinary arts programs, for example, so to go beyond that, to actually try and bring a level of competition out. So the engagement is more than just looking and seeing, but more about doing. And again, reflecting on some of the work my colleagues here have been able to do, particularly with our more applied programs, is that that's a way we've been able to support the industry. In fact, we ran the the Malaysian Culinary Olympic team was able to do their fundraiser here with us. And I think it's by having that engagement and being able to show and work with industry that it's taken the relationship to another level. And to be able to enter for industry awards, and in a number of countries and territories, states, etc., there are industry awards. And I think it's really important that education institutions participate or host them, to find a way to cross that engagement rather than be sort of seen as somehow outside. And where did that recognition come from? Well, in our case in 2003 or 4, some 10 years ago, when I was at Southern Cross University, we won that award. That was because of our relationship with airlines, obviously with PATA as well, who've been running an executive development workshop with Clubs New South Wales, Tourism Queensland, etc. So it was going beyond the traditional 4 walls of our institution to find organisations that were like-minded in the industry. And of course the challenge here is finding a way to reach out, and that reaching out has to come from both sides. And it's beyond, as I just said, the industry visits. We've been very fortunate here working with a couple of events for our event students. So the Rainforest World Music Festival and Jazz Festival, which are held in Sarawak, occur every year. And it became clear that this offered our students a good opportunity. But of course the problem was Sarawak is not easily accessible from KL. So reversing the thinking, the idea was to get the musicians to come to the university and to get our students to prepare the stage, to be responsible for the marketing, for the setup, and to go look at all those things that the event involves. So they do a preview of that, which is able to be held in KL. And obviously this gives our students a real-world industry project to get involved with, but also in a facility, in a place that we as a university, in this case, institution, have got some control over. Now, obviously, looking at the career aspect, the question is how can we go beyond that? And obviously, lots of institutions have career fairs. And my question is how can we do that better? How can we bring the career fair earlier into the curriculum in the sense that of engagement with industry? And so it's not the last thing they find out about, but how do we make it the first thing? And how do we make those exhibitions become something more meaningful in terms of the engagement? The new millennium of students, the millennials as they get called, are just not used to the standing around at a fair. And so this is something, again, that I think the industry and institutions can start to work on together, because there is a huge amount of opportunity to do things differently, to make it not just a stand around fair, but a way for people to get involved actively, whether it's through online media, social resources, etc. Now, again, lots of institutions have training restaurants, and my point here is that how can we take those further? What can we do better with them? Unfortunately, many countries have, and I would say that most of the universities in Australia now no longer have training restaurants. Very similar situation in the UK. Many of the US or even Canadian ones have fairly minor facilities compared to what is available actually across Asia Pacific, where balancing the skills, the operational skills of management has still, I'm pleased to say, been given some, is given a much higher priority. But the question then is, yes, that's good for that level of training. And now how do we take that to the next step? What's the next level we can take those to? How can we involve the industry with leading chefs to come in and to become part of that, so that there is a connection, a give back, to use the facilities, to use the industry, to use the students to get involved in not just doing the same thing again and again, but to connect that, whether it's with event management or to connect it into the curriculum. And of course, this then leads into the discussion about developing research together. And I was recently overseas at a couple of institutions in Europe, and it was quite interesting visiting and looking at their different approach. I mentioned already Institut Paul Bocuse in Lille, and visiting, not only have they got an outstanding training restaurant, but they have also changed what was the stables of this beautiful chateau in one of the suburbs of Lille. But they've developed it into a research centre which looks at issues of diet, health, obesity, social issues. How do people talk and eat? How, when you change that environment, does it affect what they eat and their enjoyment of the experience? The integration of technology. And then we were in the Netherlands to go and look at a concept which is called Restaurants of the Future. And that particular one, for example, is a training restaurant which is based at the University of Wageningen. And it's a partnership, again, between the industry and education. In this case, Sodexo, a very large catering company, and a university. And the focus there, again, very much is on customer behaviour and choice. The restaurant has been working for a number of years. And interestingly for me, it was the fact that this is not actually based at a hospitality school. It's based in an agricultural university. And it's very much of a high-tech environment. And you can go onto the web and look up and see the kind of research and the things they've been doing there. But again, it's showing there's a way of going beyond the training restaurant to doing some things that are experimental. And I don't think that matters whether it's a training restaurant or whether it's coming into the realms of, again, being a hotel. Now, obviously, training hotels have been around for a while. There are a number in the United States. There's a fewer, but some certainly in Europe, and there's quite a few also, again, in Asia. And some of them, again, such as IFT's Pusada, which is in Macau. We have, obviously, the Lyceum University of the Philippines with their Bayleaf Hotel in Manila. And so the challenge, again, there is, like with the restaurants, how do we take that to another step level? A couple of years ago, I was visiting Haaga-Helia University in Finland, which has a Best Western hotel on their campus. And what they've done there is to dedicate 2 rooms into being hotel rooms of the future. Now, they've certainly crammed these 2 particular rooms full of technology. In fact, you probably need a 15-minute course to be able to stay there overnight. And everything from sound to lighting can be varied and altered. But again, it shows there's a step forward about moving from just the training, helping our students to understand the current standards within the industry, to looking to the future, and how in this case will technology, different service styles, service systems be used. Flipping over quickly to the United States, Jihan, who was at the University of Delaware, is now down in Florida. He worked again with a company, with Marriott, Courtyard Hotels, to develop their experimental guest room. And again, you can go online, you can actually see the alarm clock that's there in terms of the, they've got a very amusing CNN clip of the alarm clock flying around the room. But on a more serious note, what he was able to do was to develop a partnership with industry to allow these things to happen. Here again at Taylor's University, our goal was to develop a hotel here on campus. We have an 82-bedroom room. And again, the focus here very much has been on not only the training, but also the innovation. What can be done within the hotel? And taking a slightly different tack initially to what had been done in Finland, to work with various industry suppliers to come out and to find a way to do different product testing, and working with companies such as Panasonic, Karcher, Cleaning, etc. So again, there's different approaches that can be taken, that we can look around the world and say, how can we evolve what we're doing? And in doing that, find a way to bridge that gap between the academic side and the industry side. Of course, probably the largest of all the hospitality programs with hotels is at Hong Kong Polytechnic University, with a hotel icon which has some 320 rooms. And again, recently they, in fact, I think it's still running at this point in time, came up with a tomorrow's guest room. And again, this was a competition very much aimed, interestingly, in this case, at the industry, for them to submit ideas for new things that could go into 3 of the guest rooms that they've developed or set aside within the hotel for use in this. And again, this shows, I think, a great example of how a hospitality and tourism program can use the platform that it's got outside of a commercial operating space, which may be very difficult to do these things in, to actually be able to partner with the industry to allow other innovative ideas to flourish and be experimented with. And of course, there are other opportunities out there as well. Every year there is the Radical Hospitality Design Contest. And interestingly, within that contest, there is also student categories. And the slide, if it's on the screen for you to see at the moment, actually highlights some of the winners of those in the past. And you can go on again to their website and see and explore these different designs that different groups have come up with. And again, to add a competitive element, there's a prize, of course, involved in that. And I think it'd be really exciting to see something like that across Asia Pacific. And it doesn't matter whether it's about hotel design, about tourism experiences. I think there's a number of things that could be done. In traveling around and talking with the industry, I'm always constantly amazed at the push that there is on corporate social responsibility and how important that is often to employees, even more so, dare I say, than management within the industry. And what we found is I found as I've traveled around is it's very important to our students. We recently, through the ICE, did a bit of a survey to find out what programs we're actually doing when it came to corporate social responsibility. And we got quite a dull thud of silence from a number of institutions, which really did surprise me. And I suppose for myself, my interesting wake-up call on this came when I was hosting the panel of experts in Malaysia a couple of years ago. And we were working with a group of students, and these students all I'd asked them to do was to meet the keynote speaker, a guy called Jimmy Pham, who started up an organization called KOTO, To Know One is to Teach One, in Hanoi. This is basically can be described as a charity hotel or hospitality college, and the goal has been to get kids off the streets initially and from backgrounds of extreme poverty, and to give them some training and a chance. So it depends upon them being able to get donations. And the students, having given them no more than an outline, went out and found out about Jimmy Pham, and literally within a few weeks they decided off their own back, not I should stress, anything I requested, for them to actually raise money. And they raised over $4,000 in the space of a few weeks and presented him with a check that you can see there on the slide. And I think that's again a bit of a testament to the fact that the students will buy into and get excited by those kind of opportunities. And again, to find ways that the industry and academia can look at that. So the focus today very much has been not about, is not only about research, about education, and it's that interesting overlap. Then, as I've been talking in the webinar today so far, you may get the sense that that innovation, I think, offers us that opportunity, because we want to make education reflect and to have research-informed teaching. So if we look at where this can take us forward, to look at this idea that innovation is certainly an area of overlap, an area of interest for both educators and practitioners. Now, for many years, I've actually been the editor of the Journal of Education Marketing. This particular journal, when it was started in London back in about 1994, and for many years published both academic papers written by academics and practitioner papers written by practitioners. We raised some challenges with the practitioner papers. The reality was that many practitioners didn't write for it, and the trouble was that academics tended to think a journal with practitioner papers was therefore not very academic. And this became quite challenging when the era of rankings came involved with journals. And so this caused a lot of reflection on behalf of myself and the publisher about how we would deal with that. The sad thing was in all that was that in the end we ended up withdrawing the practitioner papers. Now the challenge, I think, is that often when academics and practitioners approach research, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and I think it's always quite good to actually think about why those misunderstandings have come about, because to develop a relationship you've really got to understand the different perspectives and about where you're coming from. And I think the challenge is for academics is to get a better understanding. And in sort of 9 points, really, I like to sort of try and highlight the differences, because the academic community is constantly asking why. Whereas the people I've worked with and myself working in industry, it was more a question of how. So not so why am I doing this, but it's how do I do this? Academics, of course, love complexity. Lots of complex drawings, relationships, tends to be the way that they'd like to view the world. Whereas, of course, if you're in an operational environment, it's how can we simplify something. Typically, the academic community is looking to find some sort of deeper meaning behind it all. Whereas practitioners typically want to seek the means. How do I actually get something done? Now, deeper academic research will look for truths, and truths that can be held up over time, can be replicated scientifically, etc. Whereas it's not the fact that it's a timeless truth, but it's, for the industry, timely information. Now, timeless truths, it may take another 6 months to get the result. We can deal with that. But if you're running an operation in a hotel, 6 months, you can't wait. So the challenge there is that academics tend to think that research is part of a never-ending line of questions, of whys. How come? So it's a never-ending process. Whereas practitioners typically approach research because they want a very clear answer. to a particular problem statement that they're facing. And of course, academics will always typically end an academic article by saying, well, there's a need for future research, which of course there typically is from that mindset. However, most practitioners, if they're involved, a consultant or something, so I asked you for an answer to my question. Where's the answer? And so it's much more focused in terms of how they're approached. And of course this can cause all sorts of, again, misunderstandings because, again, of the approach that's taken. And finally, academics typically hope some others will profit intellectually from their ideas, where typically practitioners are seeking financial profit for themselves. And of course, there are some obvious ones, such as academics love to write typically papers, long theses, etc. Your average practitioner will obviously want something short, readily readable, easily accessible information. And of course, last but not least, there is this challenging issue that academics seek always to have their findings made quite public, because that's the way they get their recognition. Whereas practitioners often don't want those findings made public because it's trade secrets, it will give them a commercial advantage in the marketplace. So as you can see from those 9 sort of points, there are quite a few differences that exist there. And there's one quick example. I received a paper, for example, a few years ago about whether customer acceptance for self-checking. And the paper was a good paper. It had ticked all the boxes for what an academic would look at in that. However, the only realistic problem was that things had already moved on so fast that as I read the paper, it became quite clear to me that essentially it was really quite a redundant situation, because by then the industry had already started to implement it, and it was quite plain to see walking through major international airports that it was already implemented, working, and so forth. So part of the challenge here is always the timeliness of those sorts of things, given the challenges that academics have with balancing teaching and research in the same types of positions that they typically hold. So often academic research, the criticism is made is that it's often removed from the real world. It's very complex, small population samples, old data, and typically few implications. And so from an industry point of view, these are typically the sorts of comments that I hear researchers will be given, and the fact that there may have been also another agenda behind it. We like to read the research quite differently too, and the types of publications and journals, and that's personally why I was very sad to have to remove the practitioner papers from the Journal of Education Marketing, because I felt that was somewhere that was in between what was called the full double-blind refereed academic article and, if you like, what we could call a trade magazine type article. And I think that's really challenging, and for the industry and for academics is a challenging part of what needs to be looked at to find a way forward, so that we can look at more robust industry work and to find a way forward in terms of what we're doing there. So the approaches to research are quite different. And of course, sometimes academics will speak out, because many are employed for public universities. And I remember one phone call years ago to someone who was then the head of school, with the person from the industry down the other end of the line complaining loudly to the head of school that he really needed to keep his academics in line, because the academic in question was actually publicly speaking out against a particular industry policy that was being pushed forward, and that was not appreciated in any way, shape or form. So the challenges are that often we're not in exact step with that because of the 9 reasons I've outlined earlier. So, but I do believe there's a way forward in that relationship. There's a way forward to approach that, to find ways to get practitioners and managers in the industry and academics to find a way forward. Because having recognized some of those differences and some of those other differences, I think there is a way forward that we can bridge that. And I'm going to use a couple of, again, 3 little key points here. That those differences relate to the theories and practices, what I've outlined earlier is this issue of questioning, always asking why, and doubting, and who actually their responsibilities are to. And this, I think, is quite important, because the theory and practice versus the practice and theory. And again, as that earlier diagram I showed put it, within that context of professional practice, there are different ways of viewing it. And it's having an ability to understand those different perspectives. Once we cross that, I think, bridge, then it becomes easier to understand from how we're both looking at it. So as if you look at the little bird here, that's the practitioner perspective is typically that the manager pecks at theories in order to contribute to practice. Are there valuable theories out there? I'll read management textbooks, pop textbooks in terms of latest management theories, whatever it might be, to inform what's the theory about all this, and how can I change my business, the practices in my business. On the other hand, the academic looks at practices to contribute to developing theories. And the practices, or as we call it, empirical data, because that's the way they're looking at that. So essentially there's two approaches to this, the theory-practice syndrome, and they're quite different. But as these little birds, I think, can quickly identify, or hopefully will do, some of the challenges that are therefore faced. So when it comes to questions and doubting, as I said, managers typically have no time to wait about questions and doubting, whereas academic work by its very nature means raising questions, so why all the time, before seeking an answer. And I think that's quite a challenging part of the academic world, but that's not necessarily part of the industry world. The practitioner's first responsibilities are typically to their organisation where they're employed, and we could say that the academic's first responsibility for a public university, and obviously can be a difference here between public and private, would be to the public good, though of course we could also argue it would be to their career, just as any manager in the industry might be looking at it as well that way. But obviously having these sorts of differences will lead to misgivings and misunderstandings, and that's, I think, the thing that needs to be avoided, because neither group, managers or academics, can expect others to be just like them in outlook and approach. And I think by having a discussion and wider understanding of that, and the recognition of the harmonious work between them is what's so important. So as I said, if research was like ducks, then the first picture there of all the ducks together, I think, would be a fairly academic environment, whereas getting the ducks in a row would be more normally how industry and dare I say practitioners would approach it. So can we bridge the gap? Well, I think the gap has to be bridged. I think it's important that it's bridged, and I think we have to find dialogue through organisations like PARTA and other industry organisations that are out there to make sure that that happens. There are lots of other industry bodies that we could look at to find ways that they have actively, whether found ways to fund research, develop research between academics and industry. Now, of course, a lot of the times people say, well, those industries have a few big companies who've got vested interests and they've got enough money, and hospitality and tourism is very different. But I think we have to look beyond those industry dynamics and to find ways that within the industry that there's a collective through organisations like PARTA and others that can be used together on that. And I think part of that is also the agenda of focusing on innovation, because if we've got to start somewhere, let's start by looking at the change that's coming. There's going to be incredible change from consumer change, from technological change, from issues related to climate, whatever it might be. So how's the industry going to respond? And the students who are currently studying, will we hope, and I'm sure the industry will hope, will be the managers of tomorrow and the future. So by focusing on that innovation side and finding a way to combine education and research together within that concept of professional practice, and not just today's professional practice, which is the training element, but how do we focus more on the education element for educating people for the future environment that they're going to be working in. So in terms of developing a joint research agenda, and as I said, that can be hard because in a way universities are being pushed to be more academic in terms of their research, their publications, the rankings of journals. They're being held up to a whole range of other criteria, so that's quite challenging. And of course, on the other hand, industry is being also pushed to be more responsive and profitable, quarterly results, etc. So I think there's two things we can look at. There's this bigger picture of what's going on, and obviously all businesses are trying to work out how the world they're operating in, that business environment is changing, and there's a specific focus of some of the research. And I think by thinking outside the box a little bit more, we may be able to look at some ways of developing a research opportunities and research agendas. So it's a case of being smarter at what we do. It's a case of better understanding, and I think the ways of having those partnerships is a better way to bridge the gaps that we should see exist. So I think by developing some research opportunities, and again I think there's lots of organisations that can play a role in being part of that bridge. The industry is already doing it. Accor, for example, has a couple of concept rooms in Paris, very similar, if you like, in style to the ones I spoke about that you'd find at Haga Helia. Perhaps less ambitious in terms of the concept of what they're doing, but you've got other education institutions like industrial design. This is the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, which had looked to coming up with a hotel room that basically had absolutely no right angles in it whatsoever, with a whole range of other concepts such as swaying beds, lighting, heating, etc., that were really quite different. So I think by looking at that, we can begin to see that both education and industry there's a lot of common ground there. And I think by focusing on new product and design innovation, for new services and delivery innovation, to work with partners, and also to work with other ranges, because I think hospitality and tourism schools also have the opportunity to connect with others in their institutions, in design, in engineering, architecture, whatever it might be, so that we can just move beyond how we currently see ourselves. And I think those again are some important walls that also need to be broken down within the silos of the academic community. So what will the future, what's the hotel or restaurant of tomorrow going to be like, the tourist experience of tomorrow? And to get our students focusing on that, because they have grown up in a world which does not have the recognition of the old technologies that we'd have been familiar with. As I put the newspaper down on the table this morning, which highlighted the fact that the former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher had died, my daughter looked at me and she said, "So who was she?" Now again, they've got no concept of the history, the development. They've grown up in a world where everyone's always had mobile phones that have been smartphones. So the challenges that we're finding just from a consumer point of view, let alone those other environmental change issues, technological issues, and so forth going forward. And to tap into those leaders, because I think they will become that. And so by combining both the academic and the research together, I think we'll find a way forward. Now I know that's been a lot today to try and cram into one webinar, and probably too much for one go. But as this has been my first stab at doing one of these, hopefully it's provided a bit of food for thought, and I look forward for hearing for the thoughts that people have, those engaged in the webinar have got, or if you're listening to this after time, please don't hesitate to contact me with your thoughts. So Monica, if I can hand it back to you at this point, I think we can open this up.
Sure. Sure. Let me just get back to me.
Okay.
Actually, we already received the question.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, let me just read out one question. We received that question from Kunbert. Mr. Bert Van Walbeek from Thailand.
Uh-huh.
Okay, he asks that a lot of practitioners think you need academic degrees to lecture, and a lot of academics think that practitioners are full of bull. To avoid that, should Para develop a list of practitioners that have some degree of lecturing experience and recognition? Yeah.
Good question there, Bert. Look, I think, as I was indicating there, I think that it's really important that our students do get to hear from people in the industry. The reality is that as academics become, if you like, more academic, a couple of things are happening. But one of those is that by the time you've got a bachelor's, a master's and a PhD, at least 10 years has gone by. And to have all those qualifications means that you're getting out of sync very quickly with industry. And this is something I personally feel myself. So the challenges are, how do we make sure that our students in the classroom are hearing from practitioners about current day issues, not from my interesting stories which may be 5, 10, 15 or 20 years old. So yes, I think that that's a way forward. I think that we're seeing that universities are becoming also more concerned about the quality of their teaching. In fact, most universities are now insisting that even academics themselves all go through an initial teaching education course, and in fact, here in Malaysia, you have to get a teaching certificate now, I think is the current rule that's going forward. So I think PARTA can play a role, certainly, and other organisations, in being able to identify individuals who have got the experience, who have got the credibility, and maybe even can deal with this issue of of what I would call the teaching, the relevant abilities to teach as well. Because what most of the research has shown us from the students has been that they love industry people coming in because they love the relevance of the information, but what they dislike is that often it's not put together in an academic format that the students find is particularly useful to them. Whereas they tend to find that traditional teachers are very good on how the information is prepared, but it's not necessarily very industry relevant. So yes, Bert, I think there's an opportunity there, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, we got one more question. Let's take this one up. It's from Scott Smith. Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
Thanks, Dr. Perry. Have you had any link with teacher internship where the teachers spend some time with their industry counterparts?
Good question there, Scott, and I'll be honest, I have personally not, but we have, in fact, I have heard of a number of organisations that have actively done that. ICRE in the US has faculty externships, I think they're called, where various companies will take on an academic for 2 or 3 months over the summertime. Now, typically American academics are a little bit different in terms of their employment contracts. Most actually only work for the university for 9 months, so they don't actually get paid over the summertime, and therefore and also that block of time is therefore free. And I know that ICRE has got a range of companies in the hospitality area and that have offered externships so that academics can go back to industry and spend some time. I recall recently that Hong Kong Polytechnic University had set up a similar range of externships for staff to go and spend some time in the industry in Hong Kong. And I think they're really good opportunities for a couple of reasons. It again gets the academic staff out of the university. It puts them back into understanding a little bit about what's going on in the real world, gives some new ideas for research, and if nothing else, just gets them aware of the current issues, connection with people in the industry. So I personally, those have been the two things I've heard about, and would be happy, as I said, that was under my list of other things to explore, because I do think that that is something that would be a really good idea, and I think it would be something, again, that PARTA, again, could look at in terms of championing a way forward. Okay, Monica?
Hello. Yes, everyone, since we are running out of time, I believe that we cannot take more of the question. If you have any inquiry or any more question, you can just free to send in to the email webinar@para.org. Yep. Thank you so much, Perry, for your contribution today. I truly enjoyed the session, and I believe that everyone did too. Okay. With this, I would like to thank all the delegates.
Okay, Monica.
Yeah. Yeah. And with this, I would like to thank all the delegates for your kind attention. I hope that you all enjoyed today's session. We look forward to welcome you all again. Lastly, I just want to remind you all on the PARA Annual Summit, which is on 26th April. Online registration is now open. Don't forget to join us for Annual Summit. For any further details, you may please contact events@para.org. Till then, thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.